All right, good morning, welcome back. Today we're going to start chapter 14, section 2, and we're actually going to talk about American literature and art and new writings about America and the new ideas that start coming out. You know, previous to this, basically everybody was buying English books or they were trying to copy what the English do, but you're starting to see American writers, you know, they still kind of copy some of the ways that England does things, but you're starting to see things move into an Americanized type of way. Washington Irving and others were influenced by a style of European art called Romanticism, and it stressed the individual imagination, creativity, and emotion. This is Washington Irving. Many books featured the wilderness. Writers began to use a more American style at this time, and in 1840, Noah Webster, let me get it up so you can see, this is Noah Webster, wrote a dictionary with the American spellings and slang. That's where you get Webster's dictionary, and now you're on Webster's whatever number volume. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote many poems depicting American history. This is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And James Fenimore Cooper, he's going to write about Native Americans and other groups. So you're seeing these people start to kind of chronicleize what is going on within American society, focusing less on European type things and more on America itself. Creating American art. European styles continued to influence American artists, but some took these styles in new directions. There was an art school in New York called the Hudson River School, and the Hudson River School artists were influenced by Romanticism and painted lush, natural landscapes. I'm always impressed because if you look at some of these paintings, they actually look like photographs. Albert Bierstadt went west and painted America's mountains, and these are some pictures painted by Albert Bierstadt. And this is Albert Bierstadt here. John James Audubon, he came to the U.S. from France at the age of 18. He traveled across the continent studying, sketching birds and animals. And actually today, you can be part of the Audubon Society, and the idea is to protect the birds. But Audubon was a painter, as you can see. These are all paintings of his chronicling certain animals he sees along the way. But he's also like a naturalist and a biologist, and he chronicles and studies a lot of these animals, and he really helps the understanding of some of these animals that we have in the United States. Enslaved African Americans also contributed to American art. They made beautiful baskets, quilts, and pottery, and although most stayed anonymous, David Drake did not. David Drake, he made pottery, he was a slave. And actually today, if you some of his stuff still exists. You know, a lot of these things that were made by these slaves at the time still exist. But if you find something that is a Drake original, was made by David Drake, you got yourself a small fortune there. It's probably worth tens of thousands, maybe even a couple $100,000. Following one's conscience. By the 1840s, Americans took new pride in their emerging culture. Ralph Waldo Emerson, this is Emerson, he was a New England writer. He encouraged this, and he told Americans to cast off European influence and develop their own beliefs. A student of Emerson's was Henry David Thoreau. This is Thoreau down here in the corner. He took that advice and moved to a simple cabin he had built at Walden Pond outside Concord, where he wrote about his life in Walden. And Walden's one of the most famous books of the time. Henry David Thoreau also, he wasn't he was kind of like a conscientious objector, except it wasn't to go to war. Like, he only did things that he believed were right. And even if the government told him to do it and he didn't believe it was right, he wasn't going to do it, which got him in jail. Transcendentalism taught that the spiritual world was more important than the physical world. And Margaret Fuller also called for change. So Margaret Fuller starts calling for change to not only just in society as general, but also to help women. Exploring the human heart. Like Thoreau, other writers broke the tradition. In 1855, Walt Whitman published Leaves of Grass, which is a book that changed American poetry. Emily Dickinson lived with her parents most of her life and wrote nearly 1,775 poems. This is Emily Dickinson here. And the funny thing is, when she was alive, nobody even knew she was writing these things. It's not till after she died and they were going through her stuff, they found them, and she had actually written a lot of this stuff on cloth and had sewed it into blankets and these types of things, and they found them, and now she's one of the most famous poets in the world. Whitman and Dickinson shaped modern poetry by experimenting with language. Edgar Allan Poe wrote terrifying stories that influenced today's horror writers. This is Edgar Allan Poe over here. Nathaniel Hawthorne, he depicted love, guilt, and revenge during Puritan times in The Scarlet Letter, and this is Hawthorne. And then Herman Melville won fame for writing Moby Dick, and that's Melville here. These fiction writers portrayed the harmful effects of cruel action. So they basically, inside their stories, even though their stories were fiction, they were telling stories on how certain actions and the way that you act and the way that you do things can have negative effects. And that is it. So basically, that's it for Chapter 14, Section 2. If you have any questions, get a hold of me. Have a great day.